Hi. So I'm going to be starting with this GP crash course that will be divided into a few sections. So the first most important part of A levels general paper is, of course, composition, which is your paper one. Now, of course, I want to emphasize the importance of having a lot of fun while learning because this will boost your interest and thus effort in the subject. GP can be very dry, but it is also a very good basis for academic writing, which you'll be exposed to in university later. So I'm going to be starting off with this slide. Okay, now let's say there is a question on immigration and how inclusive a society can be. Now, in this GP crash course, I'll be focusing on a few techniques that you can use so that it is easier for you to be able to do well in the subject. So the first technique is, of course, start with an example. Okay, now the importance of an example is really big because it will determine pretty much whether you get an A or B. Uh, but the problem is that whether we can develop the example to make it relevant to the essay, because you can definitely just use a very random example, but it may not be giving a lot of value addedness to the essay. Okay, now as you can see from this slide, we can look at the United States first. Later on, I'll be moving on to example. Now, to Singapore, sorry. So, for example, there have been heated debates over Obama's immigration policy. Now, you can use the example of how he tries to grant amnesty to 11 million illegal migrants and get them to sign up to be part of labor unions to show that in the state level, there have been efforts as to integrate this phenomenon to a state. Okay, because there have been a lot of issues with regards to America's immigration policy. And of course, the picture on the left is just a satirical picture. And I like to use this kind of examples because it makes you think more. And there are, of course, very nice images that you can look at. Um, okay, so the thing is that he does this, but he refuses asylum to legal human rights refugees. Now, of course, we are not going to focus too much on the refugee part, but definitely you can take a look at how this policy may be not entirely reflective of how society is like, because even when the government is trying so hard to do something for society to make it more inclusive by incorporating these illegal migrants inside, it does not even mean that on the other hand, refugees are able to integrate. So definitely the status of the people in the US matters a lot. So it's not only about whether there are policies, but also about the status of these people. Okay, so this will definitely be a more complex phenomenon that you can explore in your essay. But let's focus more on the simple parts first. Now, we can definitely use this academic called Stephen Bertoveck. Okay, now he has a concept of super diversity. He created this, I think, about a few years back, where he mentions that this concept means that the world now experiences more complex migration patterns. However, does this mean society has been more inclusive? Well, not necessarily, because especially in this case, American citizens still feel entitled to a better life. Okay, and possibly they deem these immigrants as a threat. Now, this is precisely because low income Americans are unable to find jobs because they are replaced by immigrants who try and seek protection and a better life as compared to what they experience in their home countries. Now, this is interesting because you can definitely relate it back to Singapore, but there will definitely be some differences. Now, some of the questions you can consider are, how do you link what the state is doing to how society perceives immigrants? Okay? Now, remember that states can also affect the way citizens think. Now, civil society is definitely important, but how much influence does the US government have on the people themselves? How do you think this, how do you link this to answer the question in a more intelligent way than your fellow candidates, for example? Now, this is exactly why I also put a picture on the right, because you see that, well, yeah, even though, there have been many efforts as to even integrate certain people in getting citizenship in this case, especially to the rich Asians, as what you can see in the picture. She can't even speak English. Now, this raises questions as to how you can provide citizenship to even foreigners, because this will definitely be an important part in your essay itself. Okay, I don't want to sidetrack too much because I want to focus on the example. But these are some of the questions that can definitely keep you going and keep you thinking about what critical analysis really is like, because there will definitely be certain actors involved in any kind of issue. So the point uh, of the essay is to basically reveal the connections between these actors. Okay, so I'll be looking at an example that you guys can identify with more, which is Singapore. Now, this is a very big case where the PEP introduced the population white paper, as all of us have known. Now, in the picture, you can see that there are a lot of there is a lot of protest with regards to this policy. Now, what kind of attitude do you think the Singaporeans have towards the immigrants? Well, do you think that this provides a basis for people to come together to complain about something that is rather deep seated, rather than something that only came into a place very recently? Now, the main thing about population white paper is that it exacerbated the level of resentment that the locals have towards migrants. I want to emphasize on the word exacerbated because this has been going on for very long. It's just that recently the trend of what kind of migrant workers that have been coming to Singapore is a bit different. Okay. Now, the Singaporeans have a lot of uncertainty over their own financial state because there are rising living standards which have been really bad this for the past few years because inflation has been pretty high, and not everybody can deal with this. We always like to uh, portray a lot of uh, positive images of Singapore, especially the news, because there has been a lot of censorship. But this does not mean that there are, there is no homeless people, there are no people who are suffering. Now, it seems like the country has now been catered towards rich expats and not middle class citizens, which is what a lot of the policymakers, especially Lee Kuan Yew, actually promised upon independence. They already work really hard, but they're not exactly being rewarded in that sense, because previously this was the promise that the PAB had towards citizens, but this is not really what the citizens are seeing anymore, and or at least what they think is what they're not seeing anymore. Because you must understand that when it comes to a first world country, the perception of the people towards the government will always harden because they expect a lot of things. Now, this is especially true for Singapore because Singapore has always tried very hard to take care of the citizens. And so when the citizens are left to themselves, it becomes really hard because it boils down to does the government really need to take care of the people, or does the government need to because it has been the society has been accustomed to doing this. And so the inclusivity part can definitely come into play because it plays such a big role in the mental well-being of the people. Now, I think we all know that Singapore has a very high rate of depression and obsessive compulsive disorder, whereas the latter focuses a lot on how they perceive themselves and how they perceive their surroundings. The first one is more about how their external environment and also how they perceive themselves actually contribute to their happiness level. Because, as all we know, the happiness level here is extremely low, even though the purchasing parity is very high. Now, that's of course the ironic part, and possibly the immigrants and the inclusivity part play a very big role, because inclusivity also means how much you can actually connect to the people around you, and this is definitely not seen as much in Singapore because of the level of tension and resentment that people have, or the level of coldness that people have with their neighbors or even with the community. Okay. Now, um, I want to focus on the fact that these examples are very specific, and so whatever examples that you give in your essay have to be like this, because a lot of candidates will not be doing that. You must understand that, like, let's say for me, I'm not local, but I read a lot of local news. So let's say even in the A levels themselves itself, there are a lot of candidates who don't read Singapore news because they want to read on things abroad, what is happening overseas. But this may not necessarily be very useful, especially if you don't know the analysis behind that example. So of course it is very good to have a very hipster example. but this may not mean that you will definitely score very well, because a very elaborate example on Singapore may be good. Now, the question that I was giving you is, of course, in your society, in certain prelims, and of course, in maybe A levels in certain uh, years, they may be asking about your society. So that's the reason why. So, of course, the examples will all be about Singapore, but let's take it to consideration a very general question. And so you can also use Singapore, and don't be afraid to elaborate on it, because they are not the PAP. So you can try to voice out, but make use of constructive criticism, because you don't want to make anybody look bad, especially any party, because in a way, there are definitely a lot of very important points behind the population white paper. It's just that maybe some people don't know the reason why, or some people don't think that the reason is good. Okay, so in GP essays, the candidates only give very superficial stuff, and so I want to focus in this GP crash course to open up your minds into deep analysis of the problem. Now, if, now I'm going to another slide here. Now, we all know that the construction of being Singaporean is all about nationalism towards economic growth and prosperity rather than looking at race, language, or religion. That's why in here we see that they forsake whatever language that they have, or at least, or yeah, because it says before and after. So it's kind of like mutually exclusive, right? Especially at least in this setting. So even after, even though they still maintain their racial identity, maybe to a certain extent in terms of their appearance, but as but if you see, um, they have sort of like quote unquote forsaken their cultural language, or like their cultural identity, in order to learn English and to be proficient in it, which is what we see in Singapore. And so we can question how integrated Singaporeans are in the first place, because English is a national language. However, what about people who don't speak good English and stick to their mother tongue instead? How about at home and even with their peers, because they are unable to grasp English? Does meritocracy actually exist in the first place? So maybe this deep seated problem is the reason why people are angry with the foreigners, not really because of the foreigners only, but also because of dissatisfaction with the government already, or maybe there is already disunity amongst the people themselves, because they can't even be on the same social level, because meritocracy may just be something that the government wants to portray but may not actually exist. And so this income inequality and social inequality has already existed even before the foreigners came. And so the foreigners just exacerbated it. Okay? So meritocracy in this case may not even exist, because the society is very Chinese dominated. Even in terms of culture, how in how integrated are the Malays and, let's say, the Indians are to this community, because it's about 70% or 60% Chinese. PAP hit. Like, let's look at how the PAP actually framed the Malays. They framed the Malays as having a problem because of perceived high divorce rates. There are specific reasons why the Malays have high divorce rates, but you must look at it in a trajectory. Perhaps last time they had even higher divorce rates, so actually the rates have been declining. Okay,